In this video, we're going to talk about the Displace filter in Photoshop. The Displace filter allows you to map one image on top of another by using a displacement map. The classic examples include placing a logo on a shirt or adding a texture on a face. We'll cover both on this video, but we'll first talk about how this filter works and what the options of the displacement panel do. And at the end, I'll show you how you can create water reflections with this filter. So what does the Displace filter actually do? The Displace filter shifts or displaces pixels in one image by using the luminance values of another. This second file is known as a displacement map, and it must be saved as a PSD. That's a Photoshop document. This displacement map tells Photoshop whether to move the pixels horizontally or vertically, illustrated by the positive and negative values on this graph. The instructions for how much each pixel will shift is directed by the luminance values in the displacement map. Black, which has a luminance value of 0, is the maximum positive shift. White, which has a luminance value of 255, is the maximum negative shift. And 50% gray, which has a value of 128, produces no displacement. And before we go any further, I want to point out that this graph is not your traditional Cartesian coordinate system that you probably used in math class when you were a kid. This is an upper left origin coordinate system that is typical in graphical interfaces. So that's why the y coordinate is different than what you might have expected. The positive and negative coordinates are inverted in the y-axis. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out in case you were wondering why the graph looked a little bit weird. Okay, so now let's talk about the channels in the displacement maps. If a map has only one alpha channel, the image shifts along a diagonal defined by the horizontal and vertical scale ratios. Essentially, it creates diagonal movements. A similar effect is created if all channels are the same. If the map has more than one channel, the first channel controls the horizontal displacement, that's the x-axis, while channel 2 determines the vertical displacement, the y-axis. And also, I want you to notice on this graph, we have these gradients. They're to help you illustrate which way the pixels will move. Brighter values will push pixels up and to the left. Those are the negative values, while darker pixels will push things down and to the right. Those are the positive values. Now we're going to work with this file here, and it's just a grid with a star. And we're just going to add a simple displacement map. I'm going to go into Filter, Distort, Displace. And these menu options are very simple to explain. The first two options are the scale, horizontal and vertical. So these values are actually a percentage. There's no percentage sign there, but these are percentages. You can type in 100 and that will be 100%. However, you can actually go between negative 999% all the way up to positive 999%. So what are we talking about here exactly when we're talking about percentages? Well, what this means is that the percentages are based off the values provided by the displacement map. So if you have black at 100, that is 128 pixels, because that is the number of values that we can actually move, 128. Remember, from 50% gray all the way to black, we only have 128 values. From 50% gray all the way to white, we have 128 values that we could use. So when you type in 100 on any one of these boxes, you will move 128 pixels if you have black or white. But right now, we only have 50. So what does that mean? Well, that's 50% of 128 pixels, which equals 64 pixels. So the maximum amount of pixels that you can move using a displacement map is 1,280 if you were to do 999% on the scale. Now that's obviously assuming that we go to the extremes, black or white. Different levels of luminosity will of course give you smaller movements. And if you're wondering why you would use negative percentages, well, that's just simply to invert the displacement. It's just so that you have more control. unfortunately, there is no live preview. So this filter will definitely heavily rely on trial and error. So just keep trying different numbers until you get the results that you're looking for. The next option is how the displacement map will fit on the image. So if you have a displacement map that is not as big as the image, then this option here allows it to stretch and fit the image, or you can tile it, much like a seamless texture. The undefined areas are simply what happens to the edge of the image when pixels get pushed off the edge. Repeat edges means that Photoshop will fill in the areas with whatever tonality the image boundary contain. And wraparound simply means that the pixels that get pushed off the edge are going to come right back from the other side. And if the pixels do not interact with the edge, then you don't really have to worry about these two options. They're both going to produce the same result. But anyway, for now, we're just going to leave the horizontal scale at 50 and the vertical scale at 50, stretch to fit, and repeat edges. Then I'm going to press OK, and we're going to click on this file here called Displace White Circle and press OK. And notice what Photoshop did. It pushed up into the left. If you look at the graph, we'll see that we went up and to the left. That means that we got some bright values and some bright values on the horizontal as well. If we open up that same file, you will see this white circle. And if we look at our graph, you'll see that the brighter values do in fact push things up and to the left. So what would happen if we turn this circle black? Well, let's see what happens. By the way, I'm working with a smart object here, so I can always come back and adjust my displacement filter. So I'm going to double click on it to bring up the displace window again and just simply press OK. And this time I'm going to select displace black circle. And let me just disable the graph so we can see what happened. And look what happened this time. We went to the right and we went down. If we look at the graph, you will notice that dark pixels are on the right and they are going down. So that's what that particular displacement did. Let me open it up so you can see what it looks like. And as you expect, it is just the same as the white one, but black. Let me go ahead and edit this filter. We're going to try one other displacement map. I'm going to press OK. And this time, I'm going to open up this one called Displace White Circle 2 Channels PSD. I'm going to open that up. And this time, the star only went to the left. It didn't go up. If we look at the graph, we didn't go anywhere up, but we did go somewhere to the left. So that's white. So we can at least guess that we're going to have a white circle going to the left. Let's see what that looks like. Well, it's not a white circle, and that's because in the channels panel, we have 3 different channels: red, green, and blue. Notice that blue and green have nothing in it, and it's 50% gray. That means that no changes are going to happen. We can disregard the blue channel. We're only looking at the green. The first channel has bright pixels. So that means that the first channel controls the horizontal values, and the second channel controls the vertical values. So when we made this adjustment, the star got pushed to the left only because we had the instructions for the horizontal axis, the x-axis. We had nothing for the y-axis. Therefore, no changes were made. Now, I also want to point out that you can make a similar adjustment by opening up the original white circle, but just setting the vertical scale to 0. So I'm going to press OK, and I'm going to open up the white circle displacement map, and notice that the adjustment didn't yield any changes. That's because we set the vertical scale to 0. So now that you have a good understanding of how displacement maps work, we can start working on a few examples. For example, we have this shirt. It says PTC Photoshop Training Channel, and we want to place this logo on this shirt. So how will we go about that? Well, we can simply start by making a selection around everything, Control A, Command A on the Mac, and then we can go into Edit, Copy Merge, and I'm just going to go into File New, and I'm going to create a new PSD file and paste that on there. Remember, displacement maps only work in black and white, so I'm going to desaturate this image. Control-Shift-U, Command-Shift-U on the Mac. And with this image, we can create our displacement map. We don't need the background, so I'm going to delete it. Click on it, hit the delete key, and it's gone. I'm going to save it, Control-S, Command-S to save. And I'm just going to call this T displacement. And save that file and press OK. I'm going to close these other files we're not using just so we don't have a lot of clutter in the tabs. So we just have these two tabs. I'm going to press Control-D, Command-D to deselect. And on this t-shirt file, and this should say t-shirt, so I'm just going to call that t-shirt. T-shirt. Okay, so we have the t-shirt file and then the PTC text, which is a smart object. And we're going to work with that smart object so we can work non-destructively. I'm going to go into Filter, Displace, and we'll probably do, let's start with 20 on the horizontal and 20 on the vertical and see how that works. Then press OK, and we're just going to use that T displacement file we created just a second ago and press Open. And notice that some changes were made onto the text. And let's blend the logo a little bit better. So I'm going to double click on the PTC text, and I can use the underline layer sliders under the blend if options to blend that in a little bit better. Now it's looking a little bit too harsh there, of course. So I'm going to hold Alt, Option on the Mac, click, split those in half, and then just adjust the sliders to better transition between visible and invisible pixels. And now I can zoom in by tapping the Z key and zooming in, and you'll see how the text was adjusted. Now, one thing that I did not mention is that if you don't smooth your image, you're going to get these jagged edges. So I'm going to go back into the T displacement, and we have a lot of noise. So you have to smooth that out. So I'm going to go into Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and we can just blur it until we have a smoother texture on the t-shirt. And then save this file. Control-S, Command-S to save. Go back onto the file that we're working with. Double click on the Displace label on the Smart Filter and try again. Same T displacement file. Press OK and notice the difference. Much smoother, and it's still adjusting to the contours of the shirt. I can double click on the display icon and try a higher value. So we'll try 30 just to see how that looks. We might have to end up splitting the difference at 25, but let's go 30 and see what difference that makes. T displacement, okay. And that might be a little too much. So yeah, 25 is probably where we want to be. So let's try that. 25, okay. T displacement and press open. And yeah, that looks much better, I think. I'm going to zoom out just so we can see what we got. And that's our t-shirt. Now, another thing that we can do with this effect is apply texture to faces. So there's a picture of me that I took in Tuscany, Italy, and we have this rock texture. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly create a mask using the quick selection tool around the skin on my head and neck. I don't really want to select my hair, so I'm going to hold Alt, Option on the Mac, click and drag to deselect the hair. And the selection doesn't need to be perfect. You can always come back and refine that later, but I just want to get a rough selection going. So this is going to be good for now. Then I'm going to click on the rock texture, enable it, and add a layer mask to it. I'm going to disable the layer mask for now, and we're going to work on creating the displacement map. So I'm going to click on the face layer, press Ctrl-J, Command-J to duplicate. Then I'm going to press Ctrl-Shift-U, Command-Shift-U on the Mac to desaturate. You can also go into Image, Adjustments, and desaturate if you want to. Then I'm going to blur this image, but I'm going to use a different blur this time. I'm going to use a blur called Surface Blur. So I'm going to make sure I have the right layer selected, the face copy. Go into Filter, Blur, Surface Blur, and you'll see what this blur does. It blurs the image, but it sort of leaves the edges intact. So I can do an extreme so you can see what that looks like. So it blurred most of the large patches, but it left the edges. So let's just do something that'll work for this image. So I'm trying to get rid of the skin texture there. So maybe something like 4 pixels will work, or maybe 3. We'll leave it at 3 and press OK. And just do a regular blur. Filter, Blur, Gaussian blur, and this time it's just going to be a lot less than what I had before, maybe 0.5 or so, and press OK. I'm going to zoom out, and what I'm going to do this time is I'm just simply going to right click on the layer and select duplicate layer, and then select new under destination document, and just press OK, and that's going to take that layer, put it in a new document. I can press Control S, Command S to save, and I'm just going to call it JR for my initials, and then Displace, and press OK. Then I can come back into the displacement file that we're working on, disable this copy layer, enable the rock texture. It's a smart object, so we're going to apply that smart filter. Filter, distort, displace. We'll leave it at 25 for now, and press OK. And select JR Displace, and press Open, and some changes have been made. What I'm going to do now is set the blend mode to multiply. And the skin color obviously is not working for this rock texture, so what I'm going to do is, using the face copy, I'm going to enable that just to give it color, but I'm also going to copy the layer mask. And actually, I'll copy the layer mask onto this face copy, and that'll be the base layer. So hold Control and click and drag that layer mask onto the other layer. Notice how the layer mask is now on this layer. And by holding Control, which is Command, you don't duplicate it, you just take it from one layer and put it in another. And then on this rock texture layer, I can hold Control, Alt G, Command Option G on the Mac to turn it into a clipping mask so that it only affects the layer below it, which is the face copy layer. So notice how that looks much better in terms of colors. What I'm going to do now is enhance the texture. The first thing that I need to do is create a new layer and fill that layer with 50% gray. Shift, backspace, and select 50% gray. Press OK. And that's going to fill that layer with 50% gray, of course. Then turn that into a clipping mask. Control Alt G, Command Option G on the Mac. Change the blend mode to soft light. And now we can use the dodge and burn tools to add some shape onto that rock face. So first we're going to use the burn tool, and we're just going to add some darker areas, and the exposure is a bit high, so you may want to bring it down and keep it in the 50s, and just add some shadows in the areas that need shadows, like maybe under here, around the neck, just sort of shaping the head. Shaping the nostrils, the bridge of the nose, maybe under the lips. And then use the dodge tool to shape the rest of the head here. And obviously you may want to take a little more time on your image. Right above the lip, that thin line above the lip catches light, so I'm going to try to mimic that. Maybe some light here on the cheeks, nose, the brow. Anyway, this will be good for now. So this is before, and that's after. Now, if you feel like this is still a little flat and needs some stronger highlights, what you can do is duplicate the face copy. So Control J, Command J on the Mac, click and drag that on to the very top. If you lose all the clips like I just did there, just select them all again and press Control Alt G, Command Option G on the Mac. And there you go. On this top layer, set the blend mode to screen, and then use the image adjustment levels to darken up the image except for the brightest tones that we have. Those highlights there. So something like that. Press OK, and just bring the opacity way down to 0 and increase it up accordingly, just so we can get those extra highlights there, like so. At this point, we're only going to make a few more adjustments. We're going to click on the rock texture, and we're going to enhance it a little bit. So I'm going to go into Filter, Sharpen, Unsharp Mask, and just add a whole bunch of sharpening to that layer. So that's before, and that's after. So as you can see, it really helps it pop. Then I can make any final adjustments to my layer mask. So obviously I'm missing parts of the ear, parts of the head. So I'm just gonna quickly paint with white on those areas just so that we could have a better effect. And actually, let me just delete this layer mask here. I don't think we need that layer mask. So then just paint with white on those areas. Like I said, I'm doing a fairly quick job here on the mask, but it's looking pretty good. And for this area, it's going to help us out a lot that I have black hair because I don't have to be too precise with the mask. The edges are going to get lost between the dark hairline and the dark rock texture. So at this point, you can make other aesthetic choices. So for example, if you want the actual teeth to show, just paint with black on the layer mask. And again, paint as quickly as you can. You don't have to be too precise. Once you're done, you can always go back, zoom in, and make any final adjustments, which is usually what I do. I don't like to make masks that are too precise right off the bat, just because you never know if they're going to work or not. And it's not worth spending that time masking things unless you know for sure you're going to keep. So in this case, a quick masking job like this will work. Okay, there you go. We're going to finish this video by me showing you another cool thing that you can do with a displacement map, and that is add water to images. So in this image, we obviously don't have any water. So I'm going to zoom out, and this is a composite that I did. And this training course does include a bonus on how I created this image. So just look for the bonus folder and you'll see the video there. Anyway, so this is obviously a flattened version of that image, and it's just there. There's nothing else. And we're going to add some water here. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the crop tool and make a larger canvas, a taller canvas. Then I'm going to press Control J, Command J on the Mac to duplicate that layer, Control T to transform. Right click on the image and choose Flip Vertical. I'm going to click and drag this down, and I'm actually going to go right about here. But I'm going to place this layer that's currently on top, the one that's flipped backwards. I'm going to put that at the bottom, like so. Then Control click on the layer thumbnail to load a selection around this layer, and go into Filter, Distort, Displace, and choose 50 for horizontal scale, 50 for vertical scale, stretch to fit, and repeat edge pixels, and press OK. And in the folder for this chapter, you will see the water.psd file, which is a displacement map that will allow you to create water. So select that and press Open. Notice that Photoshop will make this adjustment here. Now, before we continue with this example, I'm gonna go ahead and open up that file so you can see what's going on. File, open up that water.psd. And if you look into the channels panel, you'll see that the red and green channels are not the same, they're different. They're creating that effect of water. And that's what the water displacement map looks like. If we go into the RGB channels, it looks all funky like this. So then what you want to do at this point is just make a copy of this. So Control A, Command A on the Mac to do a select all. Then you can go into Edit, Copy, go back into that file and paste it there. Control V, Command V on the Mac to paste. Then you can press Control T to transform and stretch this out to the edges. So this is sort of like what we told Photoshop to do in that option, stretch image to fit, and then hit enter. Then press Control Shift U, Command Shift U on the Mac to desaturate. And now we can use this layer to give a little more depth to the water. So we're gonna duplicate this actually, Control J, Command J on the Mac. The bottom layer, we'll call this Shadows. And the top layer we'll call Highlights. So let's work with the shadows first. We're gonna change the blend mode to multiply, and then go into Image, Adjustment, Levels, and just darken it up, dark up the dark luminance values, and brighten up the bright luminance values. So we only have the shadows, and then you can play around with the midtone and see how much of those shadows you want visible. So maybe something like this. Enable the highlights layer and switch the blend mode to screen and do the same thing, but this time we're gonna work with the brightness. So about this much, and then hide all the other values by making them darker. So maybe something like this, and press OK. And you can of course adjust the opacity to make the highlights look good on your image. So maybe something like that. You can then add a new gradient adjustment layer and set the color to maybe, we'll try blue and see what blue looks like, maybe a dark blue. Something like that should work. For this to be realistic, this will be okay, but I kind of like the brightness of the image, so maybe it wouldn't work so great in this case. I'm going to keep it for now. Usually I like to add this layer to sort of bring out the water a little bit and give it a little color, but in this case it's not working. So actually what I'll do is I'll make it a little bit brighter and then duplicate the color on this side as well by clicking on it and clicking here, dragging this one out, and maybe bring down the opacity. And then drag it up accordingly. So maybe something like this. So it's before and that's after. One more thing I will do to adjust this layer is I'm going to apply a blur on it. The colors here are not working very well, so I'm just going to go into Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and just blur it just enough so that we don't get all this crazy noise in this area. So I'm just going to press OK there. I'm going to zoom out, and I'm actually going to fit it to screen so we can see the entire image. The final thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to select the top layer here, and I'm going to create a new layer mask, and I'm just going to paint with black so that it seems as if the water is going around maybe the tree and certain edges. So I'm going to paint with black here, and again I'm going to do a fairly quick job here, but you'll see how great this is going to look. It looks like water is just going around those leaves and into that log there, around the tree there. I guess the important thing is not to have a straight edge, just because this probably wouldn't be too realistic. And there you go, that's how you would create water using a displacement map. And that's it for this free sample. If you want to learn more about compositing and advanced techniques in Photoshop, then check out my website. There's a link on the description where you can learn more about my Photoshop training course. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click the like button, leave a comment, and share it with a friend. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.